All right, so today we're going to focus on two main areas, renewable energy, which seems to get into every discussion, and also electric vehicles, because I understand that is of particular interest to the group. So those are my two main areas. I will address the electric vehicle area first to make sure we get that out of the way, and then depending on how much time we have left, we will then chat about the renewable energy opportunities that we have right now. So I thought it would be good to provide a little bit of context in terms of the space that we operate in. What does it look like? Things that are really impacting the energy sector right now, I call market trends. And these are not just local trends. We are seeing them regionally and also internationally. So we're going to look at what that means to the energy market. And then there are the usual suppliers and consumers. Many of you may be consumers of energy services and energy products, but there's really nothing wrong with you getting involved in supplying. In a recent study done, there are a number of opportunities for people who want to get into this space. So maybe at another time we can talk about that some more. So in terms of the market trends in energy, as you would know, Barbados, along with many other Caribbean countries, are very fossil fuel based, meaning most of our electricity comes from fossil fuels, most of our transportation comes from fossil fuels, and many of our major operations depend on energy that comes from fossil fuels. But there's a trend for us to move away from that, so that many countries are looking for other sources, alternative sources. And now we have kind of settled on looking for clean alternative sources. If you are familiar with the Barbados National Energy Policy, you will see that we are planning by 2030 to be fossil fuel free, meaning our electricity will be clean, coming from renewable energy. Our transportation will be clean, getting its energy from sources other than those based in fossil fuels. So we're looking to transform all of our sectors. Electricity was the first one to gain attention, and then transportation has also gained a lot of attention. And we're now looking at what we call the non-electric sectors, meaning you may have your generators at home using gasoline or diesel. You may not use it often, but you depend on that little generator to give you electricity if light and power fails us. You have your weed whackers, you have your lawnmowers, and various small devices that you use. So in fact, there is actually a sector that uses quite a bit of fossil fuel based energy that has not up until now received attention. So as we go forward, we will see some more attention being paid to those areas. So getting clean energy into our mix is very important to us. And one of the drivers really is the whole issue of harmful emissions, not just our dependence on a foreign resource, but it's also the fact that fossil fuels tend to emit harmful emissions. So there's also an environmental drive to reduce those emissions to a point where we are not accountable for any emissions, meaning we're emissions free. So we want to end up with clean energy sources that will not create additional emissions. So that trend is certainly a very strong one in Barbados right now. There's a lot of conversations going on about how we get there by 2030. I may remind you that is only 7 point something. That's only 7 years away. So we've got a lot to do in a short period of time. But you all can play your part. So those are the trends. So now I'll look at some of the technologies that we see trending. You would know PVs. There's lots of conversation about that. You see them everywhere. And while it feels as though, well, not just feels as though, we've done pretty well in terms of rolling out PVs across the country, there's still so much more that we need to do. We are still less than 15% renewable energy going into our grid. Less than 15%. Which means that we have 85% more to displace on our grid. So there's a lot to happen. We don't have any wind really going into our grid. It has been cited as a potential area for energy generation, but on the commercial scale, we are struggling with that. The financing for it, the cost, the returns are not as good as PV. So we tend to lean towards PV, but wind does bring a good option because there's actually a possibility that a windmill can run 24 hours a day. So that has implications for energy supply. Unlike the PVs, which, as you know, will shut down at, between 4 and 5 o'clock. So we haven't completely thrown wind to the wind, but it is certainly featuring not as much as PVs. And then we're also into a number of efficiency interventions, replacing our lights. I'm sure you all right now go and buy efficient lights, LEDs. I'm sure you do not buy incandescents. And the CFLs are also on their way out. So we are transforming our lighting situation. And then there are the ACs. There are also programs we'll talk about later that's looking at also making those not only efficient, but also environmentally friendly. Sometimes they use, they use additives that are not kind to the environment. And then there is solar water heaters, which we've been into for a long time, but they're looking different these days. If you look at the one on screen, you will see that it doesn't look like the one that's probably on your roof because these are one imported and they tend to get extremely hot. Yeah, so while we want solar water heaters to get really hot, we must also consider how we're using them. So if you're using them in the bath, we need to make sure that we don't cook you when you go in there. And then there are the EVs, which is one of the main points for our discussion today. So there are lots of things that are trending, there are lots of different technologies around. The government has made efforts to make some of these technologies available to us. And we're going to talk a bit about what that looks like, what the implications are. So we're going to start off with looking at customers in transportation. And these EVs, I mean, this one is small and super cute, but I can assure you that there are much bigger ones. There are SUVs and other big vehicles that are also EVs. There are trucks that do rail work that are also EVs. So there are quite a few out there. So we're going to look at what we're doing here in Barbados to encourage this and to move this forward. So you want to get yourself one of these. I would encourage you to get yourself one of these, but they're not all the same. There's a pure electric vehicle, which would run off a battery. There are the hybrids, which will normally combine gasoline with batteries. How those work is that when you're at low speeds, it will use the battery. And once you reach above 60 kilometers an hour, it will transition to fuel, at which point it's using fumes. So it's extremely efficient on the fuel when you get to higher speeds. But if you're in traffic jams, it will just use batteries. So the hybrids have that advantage. Then there are the fuel cell vehicles. Fuel cells, usually hydrogen cells that are packed with energy and can actually fuel the vehicle. And then there are the solar powered vehicles where they'll depend on some battery, but will have some type of solar panel on it that can keep that battery charged and power that vehicle for an extended period of time. So those are some of the electric vehicles that you may experience when you go shopping for a vehicle. But there are also other alternatives which you may not be interested in. There's the LPG vehicles. This is the liquid petroleum gas vehicles. I think NPC have a couple of these brought in by courtesy. And while they are very efficient, they move away from the traditional gas and gasoline, they're still running on a fossil fuel. Because gas, even though it is a transition fuel for many countries, it is still fossil fuel based. And so there are still emissions associated with it. So it's a kind of a transition if you don't want to go full electric vehicle. And then there's the compressed natural gas vehicles. These tend to be things like forklifts if you go into the port, or some places at the airport, you may see the forklifts driving around with a bottle of gas attached to it. So there are a number of vehicles that will still utilize this type of fuel. But I'm sure you may not want a car like that. So you may be more interested in the upper section, that is the electric vehicles. So we're going to focus our conversation about those. Right, so I decided to look at times past, meaning a decade ago when we probably bought our cars, or the last 7 years ago, the tariffs, the costs associated with a vehicle look like this, meaning that for a vehicle 1600 cc's or below, you generally paid about 82.5% additional charges on that vehicle. So whatever that vehicle costs leaving Japan or wherever, after you add on the freight, once it lands here, the cost of it jumps by 82.5%. So that's what happened in times past. And up to 2000 cc's, charges actually rose as high as 182.5%. So if you brought in a what we call a big able vehicle, you end up paying a lot of duties and charges on that vehicle. So it varied from 82.5% up to 182.5%. And we in Barbados have grown quite accustomed to these charges. So you know that when you're going to buy a vehicle of a certain type from whichever dealer, it's going to cost you $100,000, $150,000 or whatever, and you can't do any better. You can't make it yourself. Importing it yourself is risky if you have issues, so you just do it. So we've grown accustomed to this, even though when you look at these numbers, it looks pretty ridiculous. So this clearly represents a significant revenue stream for government. All right, so that is in times past. Now, in normal times, meaning in recent times, right, we are asked to pay a 20% excise tax on vehicles. And let me say, Natasha, I don't have a problem with questions as I go along. So if anyone wanted to ask a question and they raise their hand, you can just bring it to my attention because I may not see the hand. And I'm quite happy with explaining anything that might be unclear on the slide.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, good. So right now, this is for electric vehicles. In past times, we didn't have them. So the regime that you saw there was for petrol-based vehicles, diesel vehicles, gasoline vehicles. So when you brought them in, you knew it would attract 82.5% up to 182.5%. But in normal times where you can access an electric vehicle, the government has made certain provisions to help, because they want to encourage the uptake of electric vehicles in Barbados. So what do the charges now look like? A 20% excise tax. I'm not a customs person. You may not be, you might be wondering, what is the excise tax? Even though you've probably seen that a million times. And it's really not that important what it means, because if it disappeared tomorrow, all that would happen is that a different tax will come up called the TZY tax. So what you call it really is not important. It is a tax that the government will apply to your EV when you bring it into the country. So this 20% excise tax is applied by custom to the value of your EV when you bring it in. They will also apply a 10% import duty on your vehicle. Why two separate charges? No real reason, so that the numbers don't look too high. If they simply said the tax is 30%, we might start to scream. So we say one is 20 and one is 10. So you also pay a 10% import duty on your electric vehicle when you bring it in. And then, of course, we pay value-added tax to the tune of 17.5% on goods, of which an EV would be one, that come into the country. So when you add that all together, it means that your vehicle will now attract a 47.5% increase in cost when it lands. Bearing in mind that the landed cost will be the freight plus the vehicle and insurance or any other thing that gets added on as it comes across the seas. So when it gets here, the government will add on this 47.5%. Just to note here that as it relates to electric vehicles, there is no longer even an attempt to equate it to a particular CC rating for a vehicle. We grew up hearing about a 1300 vehicle and a 1600 vehicle, but when you get into the EV space, that no longer has any real meaning. So there's no reference to the CCs of the vehicle, which usually implies the size. So it doesn't matter the size. If it falls into the EV category, it will attract these charges. Neither is there a reference to the landed cost, meaning the freight plus what you're paying the supplier. It doesn't matter what that cost is. If it's $1 million, then it's $1 million. If it's $10, then it's $10. And these percentage charges here will apply to whatever the value is. So whatever the rating, whatever the cost of the vehicle from the suppliers overseas, this 47.5% is applied to that vehicle, right? So to give you an idea of what that really means for you, I'm going to do a little comparison. So let's say I was buying the vehicle for $100,000. That was a petrol-based vehicle. And you were buying the EV or hybrid. And just be clear that hybrids are included in the EV category. And you were buying a vehicle for $100,000. Similarly, my petrol-based car will attract, because of the percentage, $82,500 additional dollars onto that value to bring the landed cost to $182,500. On the other hand, your EV will only attract $47,500. So your landed cost will be $147,500. And I'm not suggesting that EVs will cost you $100,000. Some will be less and some will be more. I'm just using that number because it's easy to work with, right? So then we look at the savings, and this is all about purchasing, right? And we see that if we had imported the EV with a value of $100,000, we will actually do $35,000 better than me who imported a petrol-based car, diesel or gasoline. So from a share purchasing perspective, the charges on the value of the vehicle are significantly different, $35,000 different. Now we know that our dealers here will then put on their markup and all that stuff to give you a retail value. But the retail value is generally based on the landed cost for the vehicle, right? So all those will go into your final retail cost. So you're already $35,000 richer, if I could put it that way. Even though you're spending $147,500, you'll save $35,000. So this is the real on-the-ground purchasing scenario when you're looking at the EV versus a normal vehicle. Now, the other thing to look at here, which is not related to the importation of the vehicle, but rather to the operations. Because now that you buy it, you got to operate it. I can give you, for example, 100-foot yacht free, and you're really happy. But then the operating cost of that yacht, when you look at it, you can't afford it. You can't do anything with it, right? So similarly, you can't just look at the cost to purchase an item. You need to look at what it costs to operate it. So we know from a purchasing perspective, we're doing well with an EV. Let's look at operations. I did a monthly and annual operations. So to operate a monthly petrol-based vehicle, and I do realize this may not be today's cost for some of you, depending on how much you drive. So we're saying if you spend about $560 in petrol a month, that equates to $6,720 a year that you spend in petrol. Now the EV runs off energy too, albeit electricity instead of diesel or gasoline. So the monthly cost here is $250. This is actually based on, unfortunately, not the Barbados operation of the EV, but rather the average American. Apologies for using the American. I didn't have local data. We probably still need to do some work to get real local data that we can use. But in touching base with some EV users, some are suggesting around $200. So chances are we drive a whole lot less than the Americans. So our real EV cost, right, from the grid. Notice I have here at the grid, meaning if you plug it in at home, right, and you're using electricity from the Barbados Light and Power, I call that at the grid. In other words, the electricity used for your car is treated just like the electricity used for your refrigerator or your air conditioner or your lights or anything else. Light and Power really don't care. So if your bill was normally $150 a month, you bought an EV and you plugged in to charge it at home. When you get home, your bill may go to $400. So the $150 is for your normal domestic operation, and the $250 will be related to your electric vehicle, right? So when you convert that to an annual cost, it's just about $3,000. So when I look at the savings here, the annual cost for running a gas or diesel powered vehicle is $6,720, but to run the EV is just $3,008. So the savings here is $3,700, which is great. So it's good to know not only do you get your EV $35,000 cheaper, it also costs you $3,711 less to run that EV in the same way that you ran your fuel powered vehicle before. I have another line here, which is where I said, I own PV, meaning if you had a PV system at home, right? And your vehicle was able to be charged during the day, meaning like for me, I work at home. So my vehicle could charge during the day. Once I'm not going out, that would not be a problem. So if you can charge using your own power supply, right? Your own PV system, then your monthly charge is really zero. You're not paying anybody for doing that. And I'm not ignoring the fact that to own a PV system, you need to purchase it, right? So I have not included that in the full analysis here because I'm just looking at operations, not the purchasing of the PV system. So if you had a PV system that could charge your own EV, there is no cost, which means that you would save $6,720 to drive around your EV, your EV, charge from PV versus only saving $3,711 if you charge from the grid, right? So even if you decided, I'm not going to put on a PV just for that, that's okay. You still save $3,711 per year, along with your $35,000 at the time of purchase. So there's a pretty good and compelling argument for owning and operating an EV compared to the traditional petrol-based car, right? So this will be normal times in the life of the electric vehicle. But then this heading now says, in these times meaning April 2022, a few months ago, to March 2024, 2 years down the road, the government has made some special concessions for us. What have they done? Now the structure of the tax is the same, but the values have changed. So now instead of a 20% excise tax on the EV, we have a 2-year period where only 0% is applied. In other words, you don't pay excise tax. You still pay the 10% import duty. You could there, you gotta pay something. And then they also give you 0% VAT. So the 17.5% VAT has gone away for 2 years. And the 20% excise tax have gone away for 2 years, which means that as of today, during these times, up until March 2024, we only pay a 10% additional cost on your EV, right? And again, no reference to the CC in terms of size or the original cost of the vehicle. So we're now in a 10% period, and we've never had anything this good ever, really, 10%. So let's do some more comparisons. Let's compare again. So again, on the left-hand side is our traditional petroleum car, $100,000, normal charges, because this still applies for them. And they pay $182,500, same as before. Now, our EV that costs $100,000 only attracts additional charges of $10,000. So it lands at 110. So the saving during this two-year period is $72,500. Normally it would have been $35,000, but it's now up to $72,500. So the attraction has gotten even more attractive to purchase the EV. But this does not impact your operations, yeah? Because once you've got it, you still got to operate it. So you still have to choose between charging on the grid, meaning have a port put on your home, or charging with your own PV, not on the grid. So those savings there are the same. I've not included it here, but there's also opportunity to charge your vehicle outside of your home, meaning from one of the solar power charging stations. You see them at malls, you see them at a number of buildings, car parks, etc. And their business is to provide a charging facility for you. Now, my feedback is that it is relatively expensive. So if you were to not put a charging port on your home, you decided that you're going to park in city center and charge it there when you are at work, then the cost to you for charging will probably double. So your $3,008 may look more like $6,000 a year, which means that you won't get a lot of savings. You still get some. I mean, $700 is still something, right? You still get some savings from having the EV. So you would have saved the $72,500 in purchasing, and your operating saving might then drop to just $700. But if you charge at home, meaning you're paying BL&P rates, these are the savings here that you will experience, right? But if you charge it at solar power, your savings will take a dip because then they make some profit off of you. You can still have your charging port at home, and you can still access those facilities if you have an emergency. Say you forgot to charge your EV or whatever, and just like right now, we get a blinking light saying you're low on fuel. The light tells you that you're low on charge. You only got 20 kilometers more, and you're panicking, not sure you're going to get home. You can go up to a solar power station, and you can go and get, half an hour charge or 15 minutes charge to top you up until you get home. So you can still use their facility, even though it's expensive. You can use it in small bites to suit you at your convenience, right? So you have that option. I didn't put their numbers here because their billing is a bit different. At home, your billing is based on the kilowatt hours that you use to charge your EV. Solar power charges you based on time. not based on kilowatt hours, based on time. So the billing model is slightly different. So it will take a lot more work to do a fair comparison between the two. But suffice to say, it is way more expensive to charge at public, private sector charging port than if you put the charging port at your home, which you can do, and charge it there at the lowest possible cost. Right? So I thought that comparison would be useful. So you now see what pertains today. Today, you save $72,000 if you're buying a $100,000 EV, and you save $3,711 to operate it. So come March 2024, it will revert back to the normal scenario where you pay your $47,500 as your charges. So you will lose that $37,500 bonus that's available to us for the next 22 months. Now, what are the implications of this? Clearly, the government wants all of us to run out and get an EV, right? So what if we did that? What are the implications? First up, we have a lot more EVs and hybrids on the road. That's a good thing. That's a positive. That means that emissions will be down. I should say maybe down. I'll come to that. Next up, less revenues from import charges for government. Because if government is now only charging 10% now and 47.5% after the 22-month period, they're still down a lot of revenue, because normally they're charging between 82.5% and 182.5%. So you can't get away from the fact that government will lose significant revenue when EVs start to increase coming into the country. They will also lose revenue at the fuel pump. You all know right now we pay a fuel tax, which has replaced our road tax situation. So now vehicles are not going into the gas station because they don't run on gas. They're charging up at home. So the government will no longer be able to collect this fuel tax from all of you with EVs. And that again is a significant reduction in revenue for government. And you all can sense where this is heading, because government is losing a lot of money. They want to do the right thing, get you in an EV, but it comes at a cost to the country, right? So government is going to lose two sets of revenue. However, they are going to save for having a lower petrol importation bill. So if we're spending $3 billion in buying diesel and gasoline, the more we cut that down, if we cut that down by 50%, it means that our import bill will drop by 50%. So they will save money there, right? While they may be losing in other places. So that's a plus for government, that's a plus for the country. But we're also going to see less revenues for the private sector petrol stations. So the Rubis and the Shell, is it Shell? No, it's Sol and SO, their revenues are going to take a similar hit. If we got 50% EVs, half the cars in the country are now going to the petrol station. That means their revenues will take a similar hit. There are lots of implications to that. But just suffice to say that the traffic there will significantly reduce. So we're going to have potentially less emissions associated with vehicles. I say potentially because we know for sure when an old vehicle goes down the road and starts to belch out that black stuff, we know emissions are going into the atmosphere. And even if we have new vehicles that you don't see the emissions, still we know that emissions are going into the atmosphere because they're burning diesel or they're burning gasoline. So there are emissions, right? So we got that covered. So when we have an EV now and it hits the road, we don't see emissions. There are none from the vehicle itself. However, if you charge that EV at home using the grid, that is the supply from Barbados Light and Power, the question is, how clean was your power when you put it in at home? How clean it is depends on how clean the utility is. So if Barbados Light and Power is still running on 85% diesel and 15% renewable energy, it means that you are still accounting for 85% of the emissions that you accounted for before. Because you don't see it coming out of your vehicle, but if you drive down Spring Garden Highway and look across, you see it going up in the sky, some of that belongs to you. Because your vehicle charged on the grid that produced. So I said potentially because as time goes on and we increase from 15% renewable in the grid up to 50%, then even when you see that black smoke, you know that only half of that is from diesel. So now you're responsible for only half the emissions that you did before. And when we reach 100% renewable energy and you charge at home, you know you're charging with clean power that came from renewable energy. So you're not responsible for any emissions. So the emissions issue is one where initially we are no better off, but over time, the resulting emissions for transportation will drop and keep on dropping. And we can also have potentially lower vehicle operating costs. And I restated this here because operating costs is just not the fuel that runs the vehicle. It's also, for me who may have a vehicle using fuel, I need to go get a service every 6 months or every year. So there's a maintenance cost that I incur, right? The combustion engine has all these moving parts. So every now and then you need some kind of plug, you need some kind of piston, you need some kind of part that spins around with your engine, right? So the engine needs maintenance. That's the cost we have now. You get an EV. The EV is no more than a motor. There's no combustion engine. So the motor itself needs minimum maintenance, minimum. However, when you buy an EV from a local dealer, they will say to you, you have to bring in for maintenance once a year so we can check it and so we can make sure it's working correctly and all of that. And so you still find yourself back at the dealer for a different kind of service. They'll check all the usual parts. You still got to deal with the arms of your vehicle. You still have to deal with your shocks. So those kind of things are the same going from a fuel powered vehicle to an EV vehicle. The difference is the engine. So the engines don't need to do oil changes and all of these various things. You don't need to change transmission oils. Those things don't need to happen. So you should see a reduction in your operating costs for maintenance, right? But generally, there's really nothing to be done, right? But dealers must still make money so they can have you bring your vehicle, so they can poke out your tires and they can look at the engine, they can tap a few things and they will still charge you money. And you do it because you want to keep your warranty and because you're not so sure about this EV. You don't know enough about it to say, I'm not going. You are going to go and do it because you want to make sure everything is okay. So the cost might be lower, but not as low as it could be. And there are many other economic impacts. We talked about impacts on gas stations, impact on government, and behind those operations are people, there are heads, counts. So there are going to be other economic impacts coming from the transition. But we need to be able to manage it and retrain, retool, and redeploy people to do the other things that we now need to do, since some of the things we did before we no longer need to do. So those are the impacts that we will experience. Now, how will government respond? We just heard that government is going to lose two major streams of revenue, right? How are they expected to respond to this? having done a good thing, allowed you to purchase an EV at a reduced cost. How are they likely to respond? Well, they have responded already in the budget. There's this thing called the alternate fuel levy. I'm sure some of you may have read it. And this is a levy just for persons who have EVs and hybrids. So while we would have escaped the fuel tax at the gas station, the EV users will still run into the alternate fuel levy. It is a tax. You can call it levy, you can call it whatever you want. It is a tax. Because if the thinking behind having the fuel consumption tax was that you get revenue based on usage of the road, meaning if you're on the road a lot with your vehicle, then you need to pay more to maintain the roads, right? That was the rationale behind it. So if that is the case, EVs drive on the road too. So EV owners should expect to still contribute to the cost of maintaining roads in Barbados. Since we don't want to reinstate the road tax just for EV vehicles. So there's going to be this alternate fuel levy from July 1, which was last month. How are they going to do this? What will it look like? There'll be a fixed charge of $300 annually. I think you will have the option to probably to pay it one time or to pay $25 a month to use the road for your EV. So annually, it'll cost you $300. But there's also a variable part of it where you will pay 2% of the value of the mileage over 15,000 kilometers annually. So the government will now need to be able to track how much time you spend on the road in terms of how many kilometers you drive. So annually, we will assess your kilometer usage and then charge you any more over 15,000, you start to pay 2% on that in terms of monetary value. Right? And to make that clear, I will give you an example. And as far as I know, it's not implemented yet, but probably implemented soon as they could figure out how to properly implement it. Because there are only a few points where the opportunity to determine mileage will occur. Annually, when you go to insure your vehicle. I mean, you no longer go to licensing authority, I don't think. Or if you go, it's only to get the sticker. No, I don't think you need to go, right? Because you don't pay them any money anymore. But the insurance company is one point where they have to, assess the vehicle. You usually have to carry a evaluation or roadworthy certificate. So there's usually some kind of documentation you have to present annually. So that looks like the point at which government will get this information and assess it and determine how much you need to pay. So if between 2021 and 2022, when you go to reinsure, we discovered that last year you were at 15,000, this year you are at 20,000 kilometers, it means that government will now hit you with a 2% on that additional 5,000 kilometers that you drove. So that is how it's supposed to work. Let's do a comparison to see how your operating costs gets further impacted as an EV owner. So we know before that this is what happens. You're saving $37.11 on operating your EV because the cost will be $3,008 to you. So that cost remains the same. And then comes the additional costs. So if you are a petrol car owner, this tax does not impact you. So your cost is zero. However, if you are a hybrid user and you stick to 15,000 or less, you pay the $25 monthly, and that adds up to $300 annually. So since you're paying that, I reflect here as a loss because it's not a saving, it's a loss, right? So that is going to eat away at the savings from the table below. At 37.11, 300 of that savings now has to go towards keeping your EV properly registered and giving you the right to drive on the road. Now, if you drive 25,000 kilometers, that's 10,000 above the threshold, right? And when we take 2% of your 10,000 and we add that to the 300 that you have to pay, your annual charge will be $500. And again, it's minus 500 because it comes out of that 3511. So these are two different types of users. 15,000 and under, call those infrequent drivers. Maybe 25,000 might be average. I'm not sure how much people drive a year. But then if you drive 40,000 kilometers in a year, your charge ends up being $800 for using the roads. And that comes out of your savings of $37.11. So even when you take that savings out, you're still close to $3,000 in savings as it relates to operating your vehicle on the road, which is not bad. So this is government's plan to retrieve some of that revenue that they are giving up by moving you away from the gas pump, and two, giving you, reduced additional charges at customs. So this is a way of getting back a little of that revenue. Now, I would pause here, Natasha, to field any questions, because this section would have been to do with electric vehicles. The other section will now get into the renewable energy opportunities. So if there are any questions about the EVs or any of these numbers or whatever, this would be an appropriate time to do that. Okay. So I will pause.
Okay, any questions? Or you can also put your questions in the chat if you don't want to raise your hands to speak. You can place your questions in the chat. Are there any questions?
Hi, Erwin.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes,
how I noticed that you, for EV and hybrids, you did a strict calculation as though it's just EV. But with a hybrid, you still have to buy gas. How would it be calculated on that basis? And I think from your calculations, it's so what you're saying is that the cost is of $1 per kilometer. That's how you transform from the mileage above the allocation at 2%, then to get to convert it into a dollar cost.
Well, it's a straight calculation, as in 0.02 times the excess mileage. So for the middle one, which is 25,000, so it would simply be.
No, that is understood. But you can't go from percentage in terms of kilometers and just say dollars. It got to be a conversion. So it's $1 per kilometer that gives you the conversion. If you understand what I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm telling you that we do some special physics here. We multiply kilometers by a percentage and we get dollars. That is exactly how it is done. In reality, you can do your dollar per whatever for your sake, but the calculation here, because the intent is to bill you based on your usage. There's no reason to make it complicated. It's 2% of your mileage usage. So your derivation might be correct, but this is just how they do the calculation. And to your part about the EVs and hybrids, I did it as a straight EV. You may remember that when the Prime Minister presented the incentives for the EV, she made no mention of hybrids. And Minister Simmons came maybe a week or so later and made an announcement, which was an amendment to add hybrids into the incentive offering. Now, having done that, I don't think it was immediately obvious that the impact needed to ripple all the way through, because you asked a valid question. As an EV, as a hybrid now, where do I fall? When are you going to treat me like a petrol car owner? When are you going to treat me like an EV owner? And I would shudder to say it may not work out in your favor. Meaning, when you go to the gas station, automatically you get charged based on that consumption tax. That will happen without a doubt. But that should be fairly infrequent. And because of that, I believe that they will treat you like an EV, meaning have you register and have you pay this $500 or $300 because you're a hybrid. That is technical jargon. In reality, you will rarely go into the gas station. To share an experience, a couple of years ago, I was in Miami and I rented a Prius, which is a hybrid, purely accidental. They didn't have anything else. So I took this little Prius and I drove all around Miami for a week. And as usual, when you're going to return the vehicle, you need to top it up gas-wise, right? So they give you the vehicle full and you got to bring it back full. A principle designed for petrol car. But because it was a hybrid, the principle remained the same. So before I returned it, I drove in the gas station and it took me to fill it. And I never trust these pumps in the States, maybe because I need to operate it myself. I always figure I'm doing something wrong. So I put in and it went to $3 or something cents. And I had given the attendant inside the gas station operation probably about $20 expecting to put that in. And I went back and I kept press again and I kept trying. It was like, this thing is not functioning. And in the end, I finally realized all it needed for the week was $3.25.
Oh.
Point is, hybrids will use very limited gas. So I don't think you need to worry about being penalized from having one foot in both worlds, because the petrol world will be kind to you since you don't use it very much. And you will probably experience the charges in relation to electric vehicle. But that has not been spelled out because, as I said, the addition of the hybrid came after. And as usual, there's not always the working through the full implication. But I believe all the documentation would include hybrid wherever EV is being referred.
Okay, hi. Oh, hi, Dr. Edwards. There are two questions in the chat.
Can I
The first one.
can I ask my question?
Oh, someone was speaking. Sorry.
Deborah has her hands up first, Alicia.
Good
Right.
evening, everyone. Good evening, Irvin. I want to ask about the charging stations. One, will government erect charging stations across the island, or the expense now will be at the owner to have that charging station at their home? Because I like how I've seen in the UK, you can go to various gas stations or various points and you can charge your car. And looking around, I didn't see many houses or many homes that had charging stations. So my question is, would the government invest in charging stations, or would that cost rest with the car owner?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I think there are three things that can happen. And I think none of them will be government installing charging stations. One, I think and you may have heard the story, Megapower initially did not launch a business to sell EVs in Barbados. Their business was to provide charging ports, hoping that the Simpson Motors and the Cortesies and the Hanson Macaws and everybody else would actually bring in EVs and they will just do charging ports. But you may also know that dealers were very hesitant, still are, right? So that it looked like a business that couldn't go anywhere. No EVs, no charging ports, right? And that's how they got into EV business. But they, by and large, are promoting charging ports. They are expanding. It is their business, their initial core business. So I think they will continue to expand their stations as the EV population in Barbados increases, right? Also, some people prefer to do it at home, mainly because it will be much cheaper. So you can look at, when you look at the savings that you're going to make, if it's going to cost you $2,000 to put a charging port on your home, you will pay back for that in less than a year. So that makes sense to do, even though some people may not want to do that. So if you don't want to do that, the other option will be, as we increase the EV fleet and more dealers begin to bring them out, I suspect they're also going to provide charging ports, getting in the market with solar power, because the solar power chargers right now are basic. Charge you based on time and you're gone. A lot of the EVs now are so customized. For example, the Ioniq. There's a charger for the Ioniq that can charge your entire vehicle in less than 20 minutes. That is absolutely amazing. To be more accurate, if your battery is between 20 and 80%, meaning if you go to charge and your battery is at least 20%, so you're not waiting until it gets dead. If you're at 20%, to get to 80% on that customized proprietary charging port from the Ioniq makers, it will charge your vehicle in 18 minutes. The reason it doesn't charge the whole thing is because batteries are not straight line devices, meaning the first 10% will take a while to go in, and the last 20% is going to do the same. So it might take you, 45 minutes in all, but between 20 and 80%, 18 minutes and it's done. Now that's specialized technology. That's Ioniq's technology. They built the vehicle. They know the ins and outs. They can do that. It's not to say that that charging port will do the same thing for my Leaf. It's not a Leaf specialized charging port. So the point here is that you're going to see dealers who may put out specialized charging ports that will guarantee their vehicles super fast charge. And that will be attractive to many. To drive and park my car in Warren's, there's some more. Sorry for picking out one. Any dealer to park my car near there, get it charged in 20 minutes while I go and get a cup of coffee or go and order something to eat and come back and I'm done. That's a great convenience to me. So I will work with that. If I don't want the headache of driving to where that particular port is available, I may use a solar power one that's available in random places like malls, etc. But it will take me longer. And if I still don't like those options, I want one at home. So I think we're going to see three things happening in the market: the at homes, the at or near dealers or put in by dealers, and then there's the public sector solar power. And people may get into that. We may have one, no, but tomorrow we may have Zinc Power, who is doing a similar thing. So I don't think government needs to get into that space. I don't see them doing it. It is something that the private sector can do, has been doing, and will continue to do. And government don't need to try to compete with that, in my opinion. So that's how we think that will go.
Oren, I'm going to group two of the questions together. One question by Michelle and the other question by Ms. Mungo. And this is, they're asking, the first question is, how are you going to install the charging port and what's the cost?
Well, I mean, an electrician will have to install it. It has to be someone who knows how to connect this into your breaker. So just that you have your washing machine on a breaker in your breaker panel, you will need a breaker to attach the electricals to that will then give you the outlet in your garage. So you need an electrician to do it. It's just a matter of determining the power of your charger and providing the appropriate breaker and connect you. That's really not a challenge. As to what the cost is, I don't know off the top of my head. I know it will vary, because you can get chargers of different power. You can get a very powerful one that can charge you in an hour or hour and a half, or you can get a smaller one that might take all night, and you may not mind it taking all night since you're asleep. So it really depends on what you want, but the price can vary quite a bit. And if you happen to want one that is dealer specific or car model specific, that may cost you even more to do.
The second question, what they're asking is that if you import your own vehicle, if the benefits, the government benefits would be extended to you, or is this just for dealers, cars purchased from dealers?
No, actually, these benefits are for you, not for your dealer. What you need to recognize is that most dealers will bring vehicles and put them on a lot, what you call a bond. They put them there. They don't pay the government the duties. They put them there. When you go to purchase your vehicle, they then say, okay, this costs us 100,000. The government duties is 75,000. My profit is 25,000. And they tell you the vehicle costs 200,000. And when you give them the money, they give the money, the government's duty to them. So really and truly, you are the one that triggers these benefits. You're the one that triggers the payment of duties to government. So the dealers, in fact, it doesn't matter to them, except that when they advertise, they can advertise a retail price that is lower. Instead of the usual 250, they'll tell you can get this model now for 200,000 because they know what the duties are. So you actually pay the duties, not the dealers. They take your money and they give it to the government. So they collect it for the government. So the benefits are completely for you. So if you choose not to go through a dealer, that's fine. You still get your benefit. You just have then to manage the issue of, who checks my EV if you have an issue. You need to know that there's somewhere you can go and get that done so that your vehicle is not laid up because, all the dealers say to you, you didn't buy that from us, so we're not dealing with it. Hopefully we move away from that because at the end of the day, a service is a service. If you have a Mini Cooper to repair, you go to a garage. I mean, should the garage be telling you we don't repair Mini Coopers? I'm sure there are garages that will tell you that, but you will also find garages that will repair all models. So we're going to see those garages who deal with any vehicle. If you got a mechanical problem, no, you go to a mechanic. You don't ask a mechanic, you are a Suzuki mechanic or you are a Lancer mechanic. No, you go and you say what your problem is, you get it fixed. So we are going to see these kind of cross-model skills being developed within the smaller operators, right? Because these are opportunities that will be there. So they're going to grab them. So I think you should find support for it. And, I think that's where the market will go.
Oh, another question, Erwin. Harriet is asking that she wants your opinion. She said she heard that purchasing the hybrid is better to acquire than the other type of vehicles.
I wouldn't say that it is better because at the end of the day, remember that our national energy policy is driving us towards zero fossil fuels, which means that the hybrid itself is really a transition vehicle. Just like gas is a transition fuel for us moving from diesel to fully renewable. So the day will come, in theory, when you don't have fuel for your hybrid. Now that day may not be 5 years from now. It may not be 10 years from now. If you look at the life of your vehicle and you say, well, this vehicle, I can have it for 10 years. Then to buy a hybrid now is fine. In 10 years, you got full support. Yeah. But in 20 years, I don't know that your hybrid can be provided for as it is today. Of course, by then we will have a kit to convert your hybrid to full EV because the infrastructure will be there for the vehicle. The fuel is almost like not just a backup because it is a part of your car operations, meaning your car will transition from batteries to hybrid every time you hit 60 kilometers on the highway. So that transitioning would now have to be made moot. So some kind of transformation would need to be done on your hybrid to make it a full EV. And that's totally, you can expect that. That will be something easily available, right? So it's not better. It's okay for now, but just remember where we're heading. We're heading to no fossil fuels, which means no gas, no diesel, no natural gas, no liquid gas, no compressed gas, no fuel that comes out of a hole in the ground. Right? I don't say that to scare you, because they said in 10 years' time, I think you'll still be fine. We may have reduced our purchasing of fuel by 90%. There may just be a minimal amount around, but it will cost you, I can tell you that. You know how economics work. If we only got 5% of what we had before, it's going to cost a bit more. Red tomatoes or sweet potatoes get scarce, price goes up. So there's a little risk, but not significant.
Okay. I saw Keith had his hands up. Keith, your question was answered.
Hi, sorry. Well, it was less of a question. It was just a comment on the, charging port, and Dr. Edwards, wonderful presentation so far. I mean, it's really, most vehicles will also come with what you would call like a granny plug. Something that you can plug into a 220 outlet, which is what I use for my Leaf, and a old-fashioned 220 plug, three prong, 13 amp plug, and that charges my Leaf quite happily in maybe like 6 hours overnight. So, I mean, I had the option from Megapower to install a charging port for $2,000, but the guy said, but you could just use one of these, and when you're asleep, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The difference between 3 hours and 6 hours when you're sleeping, it doesn't make a difference.
Exactly, it doesn't matter. Good, thanks for that.
Any other questions before we move on to the next section?
Yes, I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Edwards, for your presentation. I'm really wondering whether or not this is really achievable in the next 10 years. Particularly when you started, I'm talking not only about the hybrid vehicle, but you went on to speak about, the cylinders, your stoves, and so on and so forth. And that really made me wonder whether or not it's really achievable.
So was that just a comment, or there was a question in there?
Well, the question is, do you really think that this is achievable in 10 years? Because I know we're talking specifically to the vehicle at this point, but you did make the point that they will be, you won't have any gas bottles, as we would say, for our gas stoves and so on and so forth. Do you think that is really achievable?
It is achievable.
In 10 years.
It is achievable. It takes some disruptive interventions now, and some hard decisions that may not be popular. I mean, it can be popular if they come and tell you, give me your gas stove, but just throw it down the hill. Are you going to press it into a 4x4 piece of metal and export as scrap? That won't be popular, and give you something else. But the reality is, if we're going to transition all of these sectors, we need to make some tough decisions, but I believe it is possible. I did a study for the ministry looking at this non-electric sector, and I understand quite well what is out there, who is doing what outside of transportation and outside of normal electricity. And I believe it is possible. But not by a piecemeal approach, not by spending 5 years persuading people, swaying them here, swaying them there. We need to make some hard decisions. I really believe it's possible. It can be done.
I'm sorry. And the only other thing I would say though, we have some extremely poor people. And in fact, as you were presenting, I went to Nissan and I looked at the hybrid, $123,000. So that's the vehicle. But you're asking me to change my stove. You're asking me to change all these other things. And we already have persons who are struggling as is. I do support that it's a very good initiative, but I think that the persons will need lots of support for it to be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the characterization of a good initiative does not justify the course that may be necessary. If you look at it as a necessary initiative, that is different to, or rather a necessary intervention, that is different to being a good initiative. Because you can have 6 good initiatives and execute one. But when you have a necessary intervention, it is something that you just have to do. So it's treated differently. And you're right in that there are lots of things to manage in terms of people's capacity to transition, lots of things to manage, and we just need to do it. So we need to manage it. We can't do it blindly without consideration for those that may be less fortunate. There.
Okay, then.
Good point.
Okay, then, Dr. Edwards, I don't think I saw anyone else or any other questions. I think you can move on to the next section.
Okay. All right. The next session should be a little quicker, hopefully.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? I did have another question that I put in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. Oh, any advice on purchasing an EV from overseas as a private individual?
No, I can't provide advice on that. I don't know enough about the specific EVs that I could lead people down the road of doing it that way. We are accustomed to having that additional on island support for our vehicles. Until we are very familiar with particular EVs, there will always be some measure of risk of you taking it on by yourself. I mean, we've reached a point, for example, as it relates to refrigerators and stoves, where you can go in Miami and buy your own and bring it. And don't worry about the fact that you didn't get it from one of the local dealers. Because if it has an issue, you can find a stove technician or refrigerator technician to address it. But are we there yet with EVs? Are we there yet? May not be. We might need to build a little bit more capacity locally. Make sure more of our mechanics are familiar with them and comfortable with them, so that when you do decide to do something like that, you have an issue, you know someone you can take it to. Because going to one of the other big dealers who you did not buy it from may not be an option.
Okay. There are no more questions. I think you can move on to the next section, Lauren.
Okay. So the next section looks at opportunities for renewable energy. And I was chosen to highlight what we call the Energy Smart Fund. I'm sure you would have heard a lot of it out of the Division of Energy. And the Energy Smart Fund really is a IDB facility that's supporting our transition as it relates to renewable energy, energy efficiency, etc. So we basically have a fund available. It is managed by EGFL, which is the Enterprise Growth Fund Limited, and also Fund Access. They are the two agencies that manage the fund, and they would facilitate applications from anyone who wants to access those funds. So in terms of how you do that, what is the fund for? There's some things that are not that critical for you. For example, EGFL tends to deal with the larger projects, whereas Fund Access will deal with the smaller ones. So you see here, for example, up to $2 million, EGFL would process that loan and deal with that type of financing, whereas up to 150,000 fund access will do it. So it's just, I guess, related to the capacity of the resources in those two institutions. So they're there really to assist persons who want to access the fund. The fund offers technical assistance in the form of grants. So if you need a grant to do an energy audit or some renewable energy study or some kind of pre-investment study, something you want to do, but you need to know that it makes sense. You want to do a study, they will provide the technical assistance to do that, up to $50,000. So that means that you can get some technical work done to advise you properly without costing you a cent. They would basically pay a specialist to do that work for you and put the report in your hand. And then you can decide, okay, I can proceed with this. I will go now and get this $150,000 loan or $200 million or $2 million loan to do whatever it is that I wanted to do, right? So that's the facilities that are available at those two institutions. So they will assist with renewable energy projects, energy efficiency projects. They actually will also assist with air conditioner rebates. So if you had an old air conditioner and before, the things I mentioned before are generally applied to businesses, small, medium size. Well, what's a large business in Barbados anyhow? They would decide. So those facilities are generally for businesses. However, the AC facility can be accessed by individuals. So if you have an old AC that's you need to be rid of, you can actually get 50% rebate on a new AC that meets the criteria, the energy efficiency criteria, right? So that's something that all of you can access if you want to be rid of an old AC, right? I believe they will also facilitate if you want to acquire an AC, an energy efficient AC. I think they will also facilitate. They have, they always terms and conditions in terms of disposal. We don't want you, for example, just throwing your old AC at the side of the road or down in the gully, like many of our folks do. So they need to make sure that you dispose of them properly. So there's some terms and conditions you need to comply with. There's some limitations, for example, 2 per household, 5 per business. And this is an initiative to get people to put away those old ACs that are 1, inefficient, and 2, environmentally unfriendly. So this is a way to get those off the market completely. So you have technical assistance and you also have loans. You would normally access the technical assistance first. You get that work done by the energy expert. You get your